Good morning to everybody, and welcome to the virtual side event of the STEER project at the Final Grow Conference. My name is Christian Knieper. I am from Osnabrück University. I am the moderator of this session, and it's a pleasure to host this side event together with two other members of the STEER project, with Claudia Pall-Wostel from Osnabrück University, who is the coordinator of the STEER project, and with Ulf Stein from the Ecologic Institute. So STEER stands for Erhöhung der Steuerungskompetenz zur Erreichung der Ziele eines integrierten Wassermanagements, or in English, increasing good governance for achieving the objectives of integrated water resources management. So the project investigated issues of water governance in different parts of the world. And the central question that we addressed was, how can we solve complex water problems with innovative forms of cooperation and coordination? This session has two foci. The first focus is the conceptual approach of the project, which we applied to study governance issues. We also would like to show you some major results of our investigations. And the second part of this session is about a very special end product of STEER, the so-called diagnostic water governance tool. This tool allows users from practice or from science to perform analysis of their own water governance system to identify strengths and weaknesses. And the tool also makes suggestions for coordination instruments, which can help to tackle the identified deficits. So this virtual side event consists of three parts. Part one is dedicated to the conceptual approach of STEER and to some major insights. First, there will be a presentation by Claudia Pall-Wostel, which will last about 20 minutes, followed by the opportunity to ask questions of understanding. Part two is about the diagnostic water governance tool. First, Ulf Stein gives a presentation of about 10 minutes, followed by a short video which demonstrates the tool. And afterwards, again, you have the possibility to ask questions of understanding. And in part three, we will have about 20 minutes for discussion, for asking more general questions, and for making comments and remarks. So a final remark from my side. When you want to ask questions or make comments, please use the chat function. I'm going to collect your questions and comments and forward them to the presenter. It would be nice if you could also indicate your name and your affiliation so that we will know who asks the question and what is the organizational background of that person. So then we can start, and I hand over the presentation to Claudia Pall-Wostel.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to introduce you this morning into the STEER approach. what we have been doing over the past 3 years and so, what I present, both conceptual foundations as well as the results, are the base for this diagnostic governance tool that will be then presented later by Ulf Stein. Yeah, what have been our objectives? We want to develop, we have developed the diagnostic approach, and in particular also this implies to analyze the transferability of elements of effective governance systems and successful experiences in different contexts to find a kind of midway between simplistic panaceas and really context-dependent insights, see what can be transferred and under which conditions. And also then elaborate strategies to support really transformative change towards improved water governance. And we've also been working really to support the implementation of the SDGs, in particular 651, the IWM target. Now, and the focus has already been mentioned by Christian Knieper, has been on cross-sectoral coordination problems related to the use of water resources, because we've identified those as key issues that really prevent water governance to achieve its goals and also to become more sustainable. So the organization of the whole approach was, first we developed a conceptual research approach, which I'll show the major elements in a minute. And that was really like the foundation for being able to assess and compare a number of in-depth case studies in different countries. And that led the base also to give start to a broader comparative studies where we had included many more cases and hope in the future as well to include further cases to improve the diagnostic capacity of our approach and also to support this as a base for this diagnostic governance tool that provides advice also for new kinds of diagnosis, how really to improve water governance, in particular with respect to coordination and cooperation. So the major approach, the framework we've developed, you could say, is the essence is obviously we have a governance and management system that is embedded in a context. The context means political, economic, but also environmental kinds of conditions that we need to take into consideration. And then we have, on one hand, processes. We had a strong focus because often there is not sufficient emphasis really on processes and implementation. We have really put here focus on processes, which were on one hand planning, implementation, not implementation of policies, but implementation of measures, and also really direct intervention in the system, which we call ecosystem services interactions, really changing things on the ground, improving the landscape or improving water quality and so forth. And this is embedded, try to understand, in the governance structure, formal rules, power structures, regulations. And this interaction, we try to relate what can we understand how this really leads in the end to, first of all, outcomes. Has there been coordination and cooperation? But also, does this on the long run really impact the sustainability of resources management? And to operationalize this, to apply it, we have a whole range of variables. We have a paper on that, so I will not go into detail, but that was definitely a huge step to develop or to agree on which kind of variables to analyze, and in particular also how, because that's always a huge issue, in particular in the social sciences, to find comparable protocols and definitions that really assure that we can later compare insights from different cases. So we developed quite some effort to develop a data protocol for the whole approach, but also in particular how we collect data and how we score also these variables to make them comparable. Yeah, and one of the things that helped us was really to operationalize. We used a whole range of hypotheses, guiding assumptions on what would influence really good governance, but in particular cooperation and coordination. And then we consider, right, and we want to assess whether these hypotheses apply, which are the kind of variables that we would need. I'll show you just one example here. That is one big issue that we had is polycentric governance systems, which means that on one hand, you have really a more distributed of authority, decentralization, but at the same time, in order to avoid fragmentation, you really need also that these decentralized units are coordinated. And so P2, P1 means that we looked at this in processes, yeah? And then we say, right, if we have this kind of governance system, under which condition does it really lead to effective coordination? So we really made a distinction in this respect. Do we have coordination in processes, coordination opportunities? To which extent is this influenced by coordination in formal provisions, like coordination prescribed by regulations? And if in place, does this really in the end lead to coordination outcomes? Do people change? Do they take into consideration in different sectoral strategies? Do they take into consideration also planning in other sectors? And even do you, for example, even have a joint implementation? By making this kind of multi-level approach and teasing out these various layers, we can go to a much more refined diagnosis and see, all right, where are the real bottlenecks? Which we find that is a big issue that that just simplified implementing a coordination instrument may not be sufficient. You may really want to know, is it implementation or is it implemented and doesn't work, or do you lack really even a kind of formal provision that would allow you to put a governance instrument into practice? So the guiding hypotheses on what supports governance capacity have been, on one hand, these polycentric structures, the ones with flexible coordination across sectoral and administrative boundaries, that these would improve governance capacity. We also looked at governance modes. I'll go into this also in a minute. Have a market approach, more regulation or networks. And in particular, also, we need more synergistic and not conflictual relationships between formal and informal institutions, kind of voluntary agreement, formal regulation, but also like citizen movements and formal implementation of policies. A very important issue are the coherence of sectoral policies that often provide huge obstacles for implementation in the water sector. And finally, we also consider the ecosystem services approach can be very useful to make complex interdependencies and trade-offs explicit, like trade-offs between, for example, exploiting food, and to which extent does it affect the provision of water, agriculture, provision of water, but also more long-term ecosystem services of the landscape. Definitely an issue that can help us to come to a much more integrated approach in water management and landscape management in general. So just I put some emphasis on this because we hear more about coordination instruments later, also with the diagnostic governance tool. So when you look at coordination instruments or generally policy implementation governance styles in generally, one could distinguish a bit more hierarchical style, networks and markets. Hierarchical is more top-down, networks is much more voluntary, cooperation, trust, and market works much more on economic incentives. Different logics of style, different kinds of way to people coordinate their action, and in particular also the way how you provide incentives. And many coordination instruments are hybrids. And better understanding hybrids or the combination of instruments is a key issue to make really to support that they in the end are not conflictual but rather synergistic. We'll see this also in some of the case study results. For example, roundtables are typically very much network-style instruments. Regulation and legislation or integrated landscape management would be more a desire. We hardly have it. But payments for ecosystem services could be something that is purely market and voluntary. You may not need government for that. But many cooperative agri-environmental schemes are typically have a component of hierarchical regulation. They have a component of networks of participation, but also work in particular with economic incentives. So that's an issue to really, I think, a critical approach for improved understanding and implementation of coordination instruments. So let me come to some results of our in-depth cases. So we had cases two in Germany, Weser-Ems and Emscher, one in Spain, the Guadalquivir, then in Mongolia, Karu-Reru, and Sayandarut in Iran, and the uMngeni in South Africa. To the sake of time, I'll show you only a selected number of insights, because otherwise it would take too long. We had a transdisciplinary process in 5 of our cases. I should mention that the Sayandarut was really supported or contributed by a research team in Iran that very much considered that what they need in Iran is improved governance. So it's a kind of additional contribution after we already have started the project with a lot of very interesting additional insights. And I should also mention that from all of these cases, we have policy briefs that should soon be available on the marketplace, where you can read about the whole problems and the insights in more detail. That I summarize here briefly for 3 of our cases. So one case is the Weser-Ems region in Germany, a problem case very close to the university, to Osnabrück, it's located, where we look more at the coordination of water and agricultural sector to reduce this nitrate pollution of groundwater, a very persistent problem, and we had a specific emphasis of one district where we really had also stakeholder processes. So there we have incoherent policies in water, energy, and agriculture. Many agricultural subsidies don't support intensive agriculture, but don't take into consideration the implication for groundwater. And for example, the renewable energy law supported bioenergy production, which was not particularly positive for groundwater quality. We have a deficient implementation of legislation, which has only been improved also by EU, by force or pressure from the EU level. And there has been a focus on voluntary protection measures that are limited in scope and impact, in particular when you have these not very supportive boundary conditions that are mentioned as above. So the policy recommendations that have been developed here also in collaboration with stakeholders, well, definitely needs at the higher level a better integration of policies from these various sectors to avoid that they are jeopardized really measures on the ground at the local level, which is very, very detrimental also to the kind of efforts that local actors engage with. On the other hand, it's also important there are quite a few innovative and successful projects that start more from the local, a lot of innovators that need to be scaled up. So really support bottom-up initiatives to improve the situation, which could include, for example, to transform intensive agriculture towards new business models that, for example, work with a much broader range of ecosystem services. And also one big issue was that more practical knowledge of farmers needs to be taken into account in the development and also in the implementation of new policy instruments. So the Emscher Basin is more of a success case because it really has been was a very success story to transform a very polluted river to being a driving force for what could sign innovation in the whole region. And the focus is here really on river conversion and revitalization in the whole area of the Emscher Basin, in particular here, that was the area of Dortmund. And there was a focus on water management, nature protection, ecology, and spatial development. And this focus shows you also the broad kind of approach that has been adopted here by this Emscher Management Board. Coordination is well established also to a quite particular approach of the Emscher Genossenschaft, where all riparians, municipalities, industries are already member of a Genossenschaft, which puts a good start to really for collaborative planning, and also that facilitates that roles and responsibilities of actors are appropriately defined. But still, this kind of integrated approach has as obstacle the fragmentation, you could say, in the bureaucratic landscape, because there is a lack of cross-sectoral coordination between species protection, nature conservation, soil and water management. And also what focus generally, and I think that it may be the experience of quite a few others as well, what poses a challenge is to engage in a more long-term approach NGO, civil society organizations, because they are often also limited in resources, but it's important for a more equitable approach based broadly on different groups in society to also engage and make sure that these people collaborate and participate on a regular basis. And our key recommendations we have here also to improve coordination: really more flexibility for cross-sectoral issues between nature protection, soil protection, and water management. And that would mean that really authorities should become more flexible, use their discretion to For example, also look at the more long-term positive effects, and when they make short-term decisions, that's something that is a big issue. And also participation of a broad range of stakeholders very early in all planning processes, which I already said, which with this particular also focus on how to regularly engage NGOs and civil society organizations. And now the final case I will show here is now one example from a definite cultural and economic context, namely South Africa, the Mngeni Basin, which is more in the south. Is also including one, not only this nice landscape, which is here at the source level of the Mngeni, but also very populated area, very big cities, Durban and Pietermaritzburg. And here a big issue has been the coordination and cooperation between informal and formal governance entities to develop catchment management strategy, also with a focus on protection, conservation and management of water resources. And despite the coordination challenges, despite excellent water legislation that has been hallmarked as one of the most progressive water legislation worldwide, in South Africa there is very poor implementation of legislation and coordination instruments. And there's a conflict between governance styles, hierarchical versus collaborative networks, still pretty much hierarchical approach from the governmental organizations. And there is also an existence of dual governance systems, the Western and the traditional ones, the Zulu groups in this area in particular, that do not interact or are sometimes in conflict with each other. And corresponding recommendations are really, we need more network structures designed by government or self-organized, and foster these network structures which have already started to partly fill the governance gap that have arisen due to the lack of implementation. And further implementation should really mobilize this social capital to really make sure that this is used for hopefully also implementation of the instrument that has started now. And also in order to mediate between these existing hierarchical and network governance knowledge, management strategies, one should have a more hybrid governance styles that really, what I mentioned before, more fruitfully combine hierarchical elements, regulation with participation, building trust, and also be more transparent about decisions and engaging people and in which kind of role. And the final issue really, and better integration of traditional authorities into planning processes in a culturally sensitive way that really recognizes also their kind of cultural approaches and their way of doing things in order to really fully engage them in supporting IWN, the groups and local communities. So that were some flashlights into these various cases and some overarching observations. Implementation is a key challenge. Also in highly developed economies, you've seen also in Germany, regulation hasn't always been implemented. These hybrid coordination instruments, which integrate governance styles, seem to play a key role. That's also something we definitely want also to support with our diagnostic governance tool. And the role of different types of knowledge, the generation, integration, accessibility needs also to receive more attention. But we also have to see it's very difficult to reduce coordination to a few variables. It's a complex, multifaceted process, and we hope that with our approach we can capture this complexity, but still come to clear messages in order to support and improve the situation. And that has also been helped by the broader comparative study that we have conducted, where the objective was to really explore broader patterns when we ask the question, what combinations of factors are necessary or sufficient for successful water management? So to see under which conditions do which kind of pathways, you could say, lead to success, and can we compare those? And we analyzed 27 cases. So we had a simplified approach and data collection. It was mainly expert-based surveys, so compared to this in-depth analysis of the in-depth cases where we had a lot of interviews and also data document analysis. By the way, this approach would also be suitable, and we start to include, for example, further cases in our data set. And we used, for those who are familiar with this method, fuzzy set qualitative comparative analysis that is very suitable for these kind of things. And we have cases from all over the world. As you see, EU, MENA region, Sub-Saharan Africa, North America, South America, South Asia and Central Asia. Asia not so much represented, but could improve still, could be complemented in the future. But that means we cover a very broad range of experiences, so which gives strength to this approach. However, what we've also seen, probably the kind of colors already convey you the image. We see much more non-success cases than success cases. So P21 and P22 reflects to, do we see coordination opportunities? Yeah? Do we have implementation of instruments? Do we have roundtables? Do we have meetings where people have the opportunity to interact either across sectors, P22, or across levels? And O1 is a variable that reflects, does this lead to effective coordination? And we know these examples of effective coordination outcomes are rare. And perhaps let me start with the second point. Weser-Ems and Guadalquivir show bad effectiveness despite many coordination opportunities, which means simply having possibilities for actors to exchange doesn't lead to effective coordination. So that is a big issue. In the Weser-Ems, we've seen a couple of reasons. One was persistent conflicts, but in particular also political incoherence. And another interesting case from Canada is Okanagan. The formal kind of structures, the whole formal range, provide very limited coordination opportunities. However, there is one, the Okanagan Basin Water Board, that has started as an initiative, is now partly formalized, that has really mobilized a lot of this region, also engaging First Nations there. So these are the kind of interesting insights which we consider with our method. We can help to tease out the conditions and see how to set priorities in other kind of contexts, how to improve the current situations. And the kind of obstacles represent themselves quite differently in different kinds of cases and contexts. So finally, some general insights also from this broader comparative study. Institutional capacity, which we often also partly measure the corruption perception index. So really, do you have formal regulations that work? Is a necessary but not sufficient condition for really effective coordination in the long run. Polycentric governance systems perform better than centralized or fragmented systems. What I've said, this is that you have both a decentralization of authority, having this decision-making authority distributed among many actors, but also have at the same time coordination. And interestingly, that's something we still look into more depth, that vertical and horizontal coordination are interdependent. Vertical coordination is important for horizontal coordination, an issue that has often been largely ignored when people mainly emphasize horizontal coordination, like in the water, energy, food nexus. And also analyzing, implementing coordination needs to take into account really formal and informal processes and the influence of context. And with that, I have reached the end of my presentation. I think I'm not too bad with my 20 minutes, or probably 1 or 2 minutes over time, but still, and I hope that the speed of my language was also not too fast. And that is now the base. And you see in the next presentation how these insights have been used to design a tool that really uses our knowledge to support and help to deal with water governance problems in practice in other cases and under other circumstances. So thank you.
Yes, thank you for your presentation, Claudia. Before we go on with part 2 of this session, everybody has the chance to ask questions of understanding. Please use the chat function for this. So far, there have been no questions. And it seems that nobody is typing in any question. So then we can move on with the diagnostic water governance tool.
Okay, so Christian and Claudia, please switch off your mics. Then we don't have any feedback loops. So so my name is Ulf Stein. I'm from Ecologic Institute. I hope you hear me okay. I give you now a short glimpse of what the diagnostic water governance tool is about. So let me start off a bit with some broader ideas about how governance works in the real world. We all know, and I already see some practitioners here also in the audience, that real world situations are normally quite complex. And for governance scientists, as you have heard now from Claudia Falwostel, you can slice this down into, you can translate this into different variables. It is really, really complex. And you find in the internet, for instance, but also in scientific literature already some governance toolboxes, and they tend to be purely descriptive and do not really offer context-specific explanatory models, meaning that you will find tables of instruments, you can skim through them, you can filter them, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really, you don't really have an idea for not being really a governance expert, what is a fitting instrument for your case. What we really try to achieve with a governance tool that we have developed is to connect the diagnosis of a governance regime in a certain region with fitting solution strategies with a focus on coordination and cooperation. Now, this can actually be operationalized into two key objectives. So we wanted to have an easy-to-use tool to tackle case-specific water governance challenges following a diagnosis therapy learning approach. And we also wanted to really help water managements worldwide to analyze their governance settings and to implement fitting governance innovations. Now, if you start thinking about how an optimal tool to support practitioners worldwide could look like, you have to normally people have the tendency to develop something on the desktop. You write down an idea, and then at the end you have the tool that you wanted, but maybe it's not the right tool for the practitioners that actually at the end of the day want to use it. So what we did is we used a rather modern approach. It's called design thinking. It's a user-centered approach developed by Stanford University, and it already has been applied very successfully in other different contexts, for instance, not only the development of technical tools, but also products and also services for public administration. So I think it's a very nice way of structuring a development process, and it has 5 steps. So at the beginning, you have to think about, you need to understand the challenge that you're facing before you actually can articulate a problem that you want to solve. The problem that we wanted to solve is already described on my last slide. But if you think of it, when we started the project, we were still having this idea in our mind saying, okay, we want a toolbox, not a tool, a toolbox containing maybe a case study database, instrument database, some fact sheets on the methodologies that we have produced, maybe also policy briefs. And we were before thinking about it, it's a selection of different things, but we actually don't know what it is. By using this process and by asking potential end users what they want and doing some feedback loops with them, we find out it would be actually much better to have a tool that contains most of the things that I've mentioned before, and it is an online tool that can be used on PC and mobile devices. So that's what we did. In the third step, we ideated the different options that we actually have, and we developed now a prototype. And now we are at a stage where we have a better version of these governance tools ready. And so the last step is actually testing. So we will go again in 2 or 3 weeks from now, having an online session with our beta version, collect feedback, and then we can finally publish our final version. This is just a few words about the process because I think it's really relevant. So what we did in one of the first steps of the design thinking is actually to interview potential user groups. And we came up with a list of different users. We could think that people from on the regional level are using these tools, water boards in Germany, for instance, upper and lower water authorities, river basin administrations. In other countries, maybe it's very relevant for national administration, because we know that in some countries, the national administrations are really relevant for the water management on the ground. And they also are thinking that this tool is really a helpful device for further research, as it enables us to collect more data on case studies. And as you know, our empirical bases that we have until now are more or less 27 case studies that we have collected during the validation case study phase. Of course, there are other actors, just to name some of them: the World Bank, the UN, international actors, but also consultants like, for instance, the GIZ are a potential user group, but they are not here in the red box because they are not our key target audience. But that doesn't mean that they can't use it. Of course they can use it, but very often they have other ways of conducting their governance analysis if they work on a specific project. Okay, so the tool actually follows a four-step logic. First, we have some the data input, the data entry. Here, you can think of it as a questionnaire. You fill out questions. We collect information on the scope of the governance system and specific challenges to IWRM that you are facing. Then the next step, very important, the diagnosis. You get visualization on the different scoring variables, and you easily can actually find what are your coordination deficits. Now, and this leads us then to the results section. Here you have the opportunity to get fitting coordination instruments, case studies that are matching with your case, and you also can download the whole set of things. And as we know that it's very important also for people who are, I don't want to say newbies in the field, but people who have just little experience with governance analysis. We also have a very nice glossary that you can use to understand the meaning and the definitions of the different terms that we have used. And last but not least, you of course also have a learning experience, as you can play around with your variables, with different data entries, and in this way actually you can find out how different instruments work if you implement them, and how this would change the scoring of the variables. So this is something that also came out of our user surveys. We have 3 different modes, how you can use the tool: fast, advanced, and research track mode. The fast track mode is for people who just want to test it, who have just maybe 5 to 10 minutes and want to see what happens if I click around here. You get some results. Of course, they are not very valid. So I think most people will use the advanced mode track, which is then for all the people who want to get a sound analysis of the governance setting. And yeah, last but not least, there's a research mode where you really can store data, you can download data. So this is more, has features more towards exchange also of research data. Now, this is how the diagnosis section looks like. This is a sample case. As you can see, you have these three different groups of variables that we show here. You have the context variables, the process variables, and the governance structure variables. And if you have a very long section, that means actually that you have scored very high on this context. Here, for instance, in this case, the economic capacity of this case is really high. Then, but you also can score very low, which is in the most inner circle of this diagram. So this is how to understand the visualization of the scoring. In the therapy section, I already mentioned it, you get a ranking of instruments based on their potential contribution to improving coordination. So you have a list of different coordination instruments, and you can click on them and get even more information on how these, what is meant by these instruments. And you can also filter them. For instance, if you are a practitioner that is working on a local level, you can filter those instruments that are mostly applied on the local level. Or you can go into the governance mode and look, well, maybe I'm very interested in market-based instruments, so you can filter them. And also very important, we know this, if you think about instruments, some take a long time for implementation, some work very promptly, and this means that you can filter here according to the timeline needed for implementation. These are examples of the fact sheets where you can find more information on one coordination instrument. In this case, the Groundwater Users Associations is a tool that supports you to improve your horizontal coordination. So you get a lot of information, not only on the function, also on where it is applied, where you can find more information on the tool. And on the right-hand side, you find an example for a case study fact sheet here from Luxembourg. And so if you're interested to see where, for instance, an instrument is also applied in other river basins, you can find this information. And I think this really supports this learning approach. So, and this actually takes me to the last slide. I want to thank everyone who was involved in it, mainly Osnabrück University, who did actually a lot on the scientific background for this tool. Without them, we wouldn't have had the empirical basis to design the tool, and all my other colleagues involved at Ecologic, they have been involved. As I already said, we will have online testing opportunity coming up soon, let's say it's 2 or 3 weeks from now. And if you're interested to join these exercises, you can contact me directly via email, or also on the chat, leave your email address. And now I think it's time, and it's really a pleasure for me to share with you for the first time the demonstration video of the governance tool video.
Management of water resources. Ensuring the sustainable management of water resources is one of the key challenges of our times. In the light of dwindling water reserves, more frequent water extreme events, and ongoing pollution of water resources, researchers are pointing to the importance of sound and effective water governance. Across the world, many approaches and instruments have been applied to remedy water management problems. Although numerous approaches exist, practitioners in a river basin often miss a central repository in which to find governance recommendations that are specifically developed for the concrete water management challenge they are facing. Researchers from the STEER project designed the diagnostic water governance tool to assist water management practitioners in solving the individual water management challenges in their regions, using a two-step logic. First, the tool provides a diagnosis on the state of the current water governance system based on data entered by the user. Second, the tool makes tailor-made recommendations for instruments that can contribute to improve the identified shortcomings. Once you signed up with your email address for the tool, you can choose between 3 different modes to enter data: the fast, the advanced, and the research track. The fast track needs less time to complete, but the diagnosis and therapy steps are less detailed than in the other two modes. The most complex mode is the research track, which is aimed at water governance experts that are also interested in contributing to future research by providing in-depth information about their governance system. After mode selection, you'll have to answer questions about your case study. These refer to diverse aspects such as main water management challenges or the degree of decentralization in your case study area. Once you have finished entering the data, you will receive a diagnosis on the state of your water governance system. This diagnosis has been calculated based on the entered data and uses an algorithm which takes into account key variables of your water governance system. It has been developed by water governance experts and is grounded on the empirical results of the STEER research project. In addition, the diagnosis provides information on several context variables that might influence the performance of your water governance system. You can also compare your case to other cases that have a similar scoring of key variables. A fact sheet for each of these case studies provides more detailed information about them. The case studies shown here have been analyzed as part of the STEER research project. In the therapy section, you will find tailor-made recommendations for your case study with instruments that can contribute to improving your water governance system. The instruments are ranked based on the algorithm of the tool. By selecting filters, you can narrow down the list of proposed tools to specific questions of your case study. By clicking on an instrument, you can get more information about it and find examples for its application in practice. The tool also allows you to enter data for several case studies. You can view and edit the data entered and access the diagnostic and therapy sections for each case study. Research shows that coordination and cooperation are key factors for the success of water management. By providing a case-specific diagnosis and tailor-made suggestions for coordination instruments, we hope that you will get inspired to enhance water governance in your basin or region with a fresh look.
Thanks a lot for your presentation, Ulf, and also for the illustrating video. Participants now have the opportunity to ask questions of understanding through the chat window. And afterwards, we can move to part 3 of this side event, the general discussion. Then you will have the opportunity to make comments or ask more general questions. So first of all, do you have questions of understanding related to the water governance tool? Live Wolf seems to type in a question. Okay, that refers to a technical issue. There seems to be some echo of signals.
But the film is not, but the film is over, is it?
Yes, it is.
I think initially the first, at the very beginning, there was an echo, but that was probably related to Ulf's mic. And then he muted it, and then it worked. At least that was my experience. Problem is solved since movie stopped. Okay.
Okay, so Lucia Hane asks the question, was the tool tested by potential users, and what experiences did they make? That's the question.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what I mentioned in the presentation before. So we have now a beta version which isn't tested with a broader audience. This is still foreseen. I can at this point of time cannot say anything about how their reactions will be. I think one thing that I could imagine how people will react on it is saying, okay, this is super interesting and it's nice to have these instruments, but still we don't know how to implement them. Or for instance, I can see a feedback that people would come back and say, okay, we are here in a country where we don't have institutional or the financial capacity to implement these measures. So that is something that we have in a way foreseen as a feedback. So for those cases, for instance, just as an example, we have the opportunity to filter more for informal instruments that will support coordination or collaboration. But yes, I mean, I don't really know what the feedback will be. I think there will be feedback on the technical sides of the user experience, and there will be also content-wise feedback, but this still has to be tested, yeah.
Thank you, Ulf. Are there further questions about the water governance tool? Okay. There is a question posed by Nguyet. I hope I pronounced it correctly. I'm sorry if I did it wrong.
Yeah, I just answered this question directly. I mean, it's this tool can be applied in Vietnam, and I can only remember you to send me your contacts. We will keep you in the loop already for the testing phase. And actually, we tested it internally, and it takes about, for the advanced track mode, about an hour to fill out the questions. If you're familiar with your river basin and the governance settings a bit, and I think most of you who are interested in these water governance issues can fill it out within an hour. And then you get the analysis, and actually you can see, and we can discuss together if these instruments are fitting or not. So this then gets a really interesting discussion. So I can only encourage you to send me the contact details, and I keep you in the loop for the online testing. The data that you have to put in there is actually pretty simplified. I mean, we are not asking you the questions that we, for instance, have asked in our in-depth interviews. The questions are a bit more written in a layman's language, not using so many technical details, and you don't even need to input data or anything like this. So I think it can be applied right away in your basin.
Mm-hmm. And if you want to approach Ulf Stein, you can use the email address which is shown on the presentation slide that you can see now on your screen. Okay, another question by Leif Wolf.
The question was here from Leif Wolf is if the tool mostly always recommends polycentric governance instruments, since this is an overarching project finding. I mean, I think, so first off, when we started collecting the data for the instrument database, we had a lot of formal instruments there. Afterwards, we also added lots of informal instruments, at the end of the day, I still have to look. I mean, we have these overview tables. I can't really answer this question right now, but the analysis whether something is being polycentric or not, that is definitely, the analysis is given. the instruments per se are not, you can't really judge them whether they support polycentric governance or not very easily. So this is in a way a very weak classification. We cannot really say that very strongly with very strong evidence. But maybe Claudia also wants to say a few words about polycentric governance instruments.
Yeah, I think polycentric governance is something that you can't simply recommend. That is something more a feature of a polycentric governance system. The question is much more, and what Ulstein already said, the instruments are much more specific. They are, for example, really tailor-made some instrument. The question is whether it would relate to a logic of a more polycentric governance system, which would mean, is it in line with broadening the kind of actors who make decisions? Is decision-making transparent? Does it already, if there is a distribution of actors, does it really support a stronger integration? Overall, we have found that obviously having no monolithic decision-making structure where you have a hierarchical mode, where it's a centralized planning, seems to be much more appropriate to deal with these complex governance issues. So that would also mean that instruments that move in this direction obviously would be more appropriate rather than a kind of, for example, supporting a further centralized system. But as we also take into account context, I think the kind of instruments that are recommended will be quite different depending on context, because that is one of the big issues, how to find pathways to have a more polycentric governance system in different contexts. Which extent because if you have no distribution of authority, if you still have like in some like Kazakhstan or some of these kind of countries, a very strong hierarchical government. So that would be a very different way of how, for example, engaging different layers of government than in other kind of countries with different tradition. But I would say, based on understanding, that instruments would support a style that moves governance in a direction towards more polycentricity. But that, as I said, this is always embedded in the political system, may be different depending on the kind of context where you make recommendations. So as I said, the recommendations would much more support individual instruments. But in the end, the trajectory might be more or less in line with moving towards more polycentric governance. And even in China, you have polycentricity, believe it or not.
We are moving more and more to the general discussion. So please feel encouraged to also ask questions or make comments about the conceptual approach of this tier project, or questions or remarks about certain results. But of course, you are still free to talk about the governance tool.
Maybe I may ask the question. Maybe some people need some more time to think about approach the question. One question that I have to Christian, and maybe that needs a bit more of explanation. I mean, we have now collected 27 validation case studies and used this as a basis, empirical basis for the governance tool. So do you think this is actually something that is a good databases, or is it databases solid enough to answer questions around the globe?
Good question. So I would say that having 27 cases is a good basis if you compare it with many other comparative governance assessments. Usually the number of case studies in such assessments is much lower. Nevertheless, we still have certain regions which are clearly underrepresented. For example, Latin America or Australia or parts of Asia. So it would be desirable to add, further cases, which is possible through this governance tool, and to expand our analysis with a broader data set. I think this would help us to develop further recommendations for other contexts which are a bit underrepresented in the current case study data set. Nevertheless, I still think that having 27 cases is already quite good, but it could still be further improved.
Yeah, may I just add to that? I can only support what Christian said. And we have still in mind that now we have this tool, it's always you have the tool once the project is over. Would be very nice to add experiences and add further cases when the tool is also applied. But that will not be happening in a self-organized process, only digitally supported. We are still seeking or have been looking for how to continue to work on this tool and see whether this works out, that we might need additional funding. It's not particularly easy to collaborate with many international networks now in Corona times. Everyone seems to struggle mainly how to get organized because so many things have become so complicated. Also, for example, the implementation of the whole monitoring process of SDG 651, which definitely governments have something else to do these days than filling out questionnaires on water, even when they're very prevalent. So the whole Corona situation has definitely made this kind of activities to collaborate or see how we can collaborate in larger networks and get funding a bit more difficult. But this doesn't, but water continues, and even more so is high on the agenda. And some kind of way to add further cases would be very beneficial to really make use of this tremendous effort and a valuable database to further look at experiences and further improve it. That would be very useful. We'll try to do so.
Yeah, also maybe something that I want to add here to my own question, I must say, is something that we experience in the project is although in many, for instance, water boards or water user associations, the idea of governance, they know the word, sometimes they have some experiences, maybe they have also experts from social sciences working at such an administration. We know, I mean, very often they are on the first step, they take the first step into the direction. They know that it's important to improve collaboration, coordination, but they don't know how to do it. And not all the river basins actually have the opportunity to pay someone doing a solid governance analysis. And for those cases, actually, the tool might provide some future help. In a way, it's an entry into the field. I think at some point, River Basin Authority also needs to get external help, but I think it's a good starting point actually for an internal discussion in such an administration. What can be done besides technical measures, which are normally applied, but what we know from scientific literature and also by experience that doing technical implementation of IWRM does only bring you to a certain point, but if you really want to go into integrated management, you have to think solidly about your governance settings and how to overcome bottlenecks.
Maybe one point from my side. Sorry for interrupting you. We are 6 minutes over time. I see there's another question, so we have time for another 1 or 2 questions, but I would like to request you to slowly close the session. And yeah, there will also be a possibility or opportunity to continue this discussion at the Steer booth. It's on the marketplace and also in the networking lounge. But yeah, I think for 1 or 2 questions, there's still time. As I see, there are 2 new questions now. Thanks.
Maybe I take up the first question about the uncertainty of the input. Yeah, I know. I read some papers also on uncertainty of data input. I mean, surely this will influence the results and also the scoring. it's not so, and this is also what we experience in our case studies when working or conducting ourselves in the in-depth case studies interviews. We notice that variables change, so there is some uncertainty with the data input to some extent. But what we did in a way in the case studies that we have used is that we did not use the information that we had available for a certain point of time. We looked into the last 5 years, last 10 years, so a longer period in order also, to circumvent these pitfalls related to uncertainty, because very often some collaboration does not work out because it's connected to certain people, certain personalities that hinder processes that are important for bringing forward integrated water resource management. But then if you look more into the past, then you notice, this is actually just something that can't be, we can't find a solution for that because it's really belonging to this one person, this key person. So it makes sense that you don't only have a focus on a certain point of time, but also regard a longer period and how are things. And if you do this, I think then uncertainty gets a bit smaller, but still, yes. I mean, we also sometimes had issues to, for instance, score between high and very high. So the differences there are not so strong that it's sometimes easy to score those things correctly. And behind the scoring is always, in a way, answering the question. So yes, the data uncertainty as input for the variables is certainly an issue. And this is definitely something where the tool can be improved in the future.
May I just perhaps add your comment to the suggestion of, or the question of Leif Wolf, whether Corona impacts could really consider that digital tools might be more used for governance or make it more transparent. I should say we have another project where we look at the role of crisis in transformative change and changing also, in particular on the water energy food nexus. It's collaboration with South African partners where we look also at Corona and want to look at different kinds of crises. And so that what we thought much more about looking at what does Corona do to how citizens perceive government, and government, obviously the role of government, trust in government is a key issue that might change entirely governance in a more broader sense. We haven't yet thought about whether the digital tools that are used now very much so would definitely be also a pathway that would probably support more this avenue to make governance more transparent. That's an interesting thought, and we might take this up when we think about the role of such a crisis, also for different ways of communication. That's an interesting thought.
Mm-hmm. I could also see that here, for instance, applying artificial intelligence would be actually the next step to further develop such a tool.
Okay, since we are already over time, I would suggest that you, Claudia, say a few concluding words about the STEER project.
Yeah, concluding, that's obviously, as always, we could have profited from having more time to continue and further work on that, because now we have this great tool, and now the project is over, but we'll find means also to further also communicate our results and also work on the tool. And anyone more interested, we will have, as I mentioned, we'll have on the marketplace, there is still this tool available, the video, and people, if you want to further talk about it, we will have the policy briefs of the cases soon uploaded there, and also further publications will become available where you can read more about the STEER project. And I hope otherwise that we could convey to you some interesting insights and raise your interest and spread the interesting news to your communities. And thanks also to everyone participating in this side event.
Okay, yeah, thank you also from my side. Thank you for this interesting insights into 3 years research of the STEER project. The recording of this event will be available during the course of the conference at the STEER booth. And yes, with these words, I would like to close the session. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you.